Hey, so thank you very much, everybody, for joining us. Today, we're going to be talking a little bit about how we can integrate our healthy lifestyle behaviors into our routine, predominantly focusing around exercise and refraining from injury and keeping ourselves as fit and as active as we can throughout the year. Um, Today, with us, we've got my colleague. So my name's Luke. I'm an operations lead within PAM. It sounds a little bit fancier than what it is, maybe essentially a senior clinician that has a line management responsibility as well. My particular interest within MSK Health has been chronic pain and also promoting lifestyle change and keeping healthy lifestyle routines. So we're quite well placed for today. Jake, do you want to introduce yourself as well?
Yeah, thanks for having us, Luke, and welcome everyone into the meeting. My name's Jake. I'm also an operational lead here at PAM. My interests outside of the workplace are more around healthy habits, lifestyle, and conditioning, which ties in nicely to the presentation today.
That's great. And finally, Nathan.
Hiya everyone. My name's Nathan Cross. I'm a musculoskeletal clinician from PAM. I've worked with PAM since about April, and like I say, very similar to Luke and Jake. My interests a lot about sort of chronic pain, persistent pain, and also exercise and conditioning have been my sort of interests throughout my time as a clinician.
Yeah, Jake and I might be nodding there. I think Nathan puts me and Jake to shame a little bit with the amount of exercise he gets through. So he might be your go-to for today for a lot of the information about the benefits. So yeah, just to give you a little bit of an overarching idea about today, we are going to talk a little bit about the benefits of exercise. I know some of those, or a lot of them, are very readily available and accessible to learn from different sources. A lot of us know the benefits of exercise, but we will just reiterate that. We'll also touch on what the government recommendations are for exercise and see if we're hitting that and if we can. We're then going to touch on how risky is exercise. I know obviously today we want to talk about preserving our overall health, refraining from injury, and being able to keep active within our routine. So we're going to talk about how we can manage that and some of the things to be aware of regarding it. Moving on to talk about how we can, whether that's still the case with a painful condition and whether we can still exercise readily and do the things that we want to do. Then moving on to the real nitty gritty of what we want to know, how we can build exercise, healthy lifestyle habits into our routine and keep it there so we can get some really sustainable long-term benefits. This recording will be recorded today, so you will have access back to it if you need to. And you might also see on the Teams meeting that there is a chat function at the top. We will have a formal Q&A at the end, but just throughout the presentation, we might just ask you to pop little bits in the chat. Also, even if we don't ask and there's something that you want us to touch on or something you want a little bit more information about, I'll keep my eye on that chat function and we'll answer it as we can and as we go throughout. Today might be a little bit more of a flexible delivery style with three of us being here. We'll like to try and have as much of a conversation as we can, so it's not death by PowerPoint and you can take some really useful information back with you. So initially, how much exercise should we do and what are some of the benefits? You can see before we move on and we talk about the benefits, how much we should do, I think it's probably best to try and define it. You can see the definition at the top: activity requiring physical effort carried out to sustain or improve health and fitness. So that's obviously how it reads in the dictionary. Jake, how do you define exercise?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question, Luke, and exercise can be defined in many ways. It's really any form of physical activity where it's going to raise your heart rate, getting you working a little bit more difficult than you usually would. So that can look a few different ways. And in the blue boxes on the screen here, we've got some of the different definitions. So the first one would be moderate intensity exercise. So we look for around 150 minutes per week of moderate intensity. That might be something as simple as 30 minutes over 5 days with a couple of rest days in there. Alternatively, you could look at a more intense format. which would actually require less commitment and time. So 75 minutes of intense exercise a week would achieve that sort of goal. And the difference between the two can largely be sort of determined by two things in particular. So your breathing rate and also your speech. So moderate intensity exercise is somewhere where you should be able to really maintain a bit of a conversation whilst exercising, whereas more intense exercise, you would find it difficult to string a sentence together to figure out whether or not you fall into one category or the other.
Brilliant. Yeah, I think that's really clear. Thank you for clarifying that for us, Jake. We're now going to come on to talk a little bit more about the benefits of exercise, and a lot of those are going to be considered around health, really. If you can, what I'd like you to do, I think it'll be interesting to see the variance in the group. Let us know in the chat function what you think the definition of health is, or how you would describe a healthy person. So you can pop that in the chat function and we'll review that as we go through. But Nathan, for you, what are some of the key benefits of exercise?
I think the key benefits of exercise can be separated in, obviously, as we've spoken about, obviously the physical aspects of it, in terms of general overall health, in terms of cardiovascular mortality and bone health and things like that, muscular health as well, but also in terms of like mental, in terms of like when we do exercise, what it does for our body, in releasing sort of our happy hormones, like our sort of endorphins and dopamine and serotonin and things like that, which can have a massive impact as well on our physical health as well. So they can all kind of tie into a bit of each other. And also, I think essentially a lot of benefits that we kind of ridicule in terms of exercise is the social aspects to it, especially coming out of the pandemic as well. I think allowing yourself to meet new people and achieve new goals whilst incorporating like fitness and being socially active as well is also really good, and just tying into it almost ties into a combination of each other. And if it was kind of like in a diagram, they would kind of tie into each other really nicely. So yeah, those are kind of just briefly some of the sort of aspects that I would say that has the massive benefits of exercise, 100%.
Yeah, I think it's great to look across the whole perspective of the benefits, isn't it? When we think of exercise, naturally we'll think of somebody who might have massive biceps, who might think of somebody that can run a marathon or has a low chance of cardiovascular disease and no other health conditions. But it's also important to look at the social aspects. I think socially, we tend to associate that with social groups, going out, seeing people, being involved, whether you play five-a-side or whatever you do for sport. Yeah. But I think that the social benefits of health, of exercise, is that we can do what we want to be able to do. We're not limited or we're not capped by our health conditions. And that's where exercise can be really beneficial for us, especially as we age.
100%.
Still being able to get out, do what you want, be the determinant of what you want to do with your day-to-day life is really important. And that's ultimately where exercise can take us. And I think that that's really interesting. If we look at the chat function here, we've got some really varying ideas, but also a lot of crossovers. Pauline saying that no aches and pains means that you're healthy. Susan saying that she doesn't really exercise, but she does a lot of housework and gardening. And we're actually going to refer back to that later on. A lot of the things that we don't see as being exercise are still actually really good for our health. Jane said being able to live a good life without pain. I think that's a really good way of terming it, being able to live a good life especially. Karen, healthy mind and body, where you can exercise and feel good about it with very little pain afterwards. Again, very similar about the pain reference, but actually being overall healthy and in a good mental state is really good. Susan rubbing it in that she'll retire in a year, and she wants to remain healthy, so that's great. And absolutely, that's a very good motivating factor that you can to make these changes now so that you can benefit from it in the future. And then Penny mentioning a good quality of life, being able to join and take part in activities of varying degrees without long-term effects. Perfect. All a lot of crossover there. Yeah, it's a good little variance there, isn't it? And I think that a lot of people have hit the nail on the head, really. Nathan, you touched on this really well. But the definition of health isn't just being physically well, it's not being without disease. It's being able to optimize our physical, mental, and social well-being in the absence of disease. So we can then move on to a graph, and Nathan, you referred to this a little bit about how everything ties into each other. And often what you can find with these certain aspects of health is that it's a bit of a snowball effect, either positively or negatively. Once you start to exercise well, that might improve your sleep, improves how you feel. You then feel more confident doing things with the kids or the grandkids, going out with your partner. You've got more energy, and all of these things build up and make the snowball bigger and bigger and bigger and have positive effects on your lifestyle. But then on the adverse side, we can also have a negative snowball effect where we might not exercise as much, we might not be really active. That can lead us to being quite achy, quite sore. We're not exerting energy, so we don't sleep as well. Everything's more of a challenge because we're not maintaining our physical well-being. So I think, and that can then ultimately build up and get quite a negative snowball effect. So that's where some of the benefits can be really useful. I know, Jake, a huge part of your practice as a clinician or working within people who have injuries is something called the biopsychosocial model. That sounds quite overwhelming and quite complex, but Jake, you can explain it really quite well.
Yeah, I think the sort of graph on the screen here actually demonstrates all three of those categories in quite an important way, Luke. So as you say, the psycho comes into the mental aspects and the sort of chemical releases that you get actually from exercise. Some of the social benefits in terms of like meeting new people can be fantastic. Being able to share the goals that you've achieved and sort of the increased fitness that you can gain through that social interaction is really important. And engaging other people in your lifestyle to not only improve yourself, but to also push those around you to achieve their own aspirations. And then from a physical perspective, which we won't delve into too deeply on this slide, there's obviously the physiological benefits of exercise, which I think we're going to come on to talk about next.
Yeah, and they all are interchangeable and they all impact each other, which is really important. Thank you for summarising that. Nathan, I know this next slide, as you touched on, you work with a lot of people who have persistent pain, and that's a particular interest for you. So one of the things that's popped up quite a lot in the kind of comment section is exercising with no aches and pains, being able to do something with as little damage as possible. Can you talk to us a little bit about whether exercise is risky, whether you think that it's something that we should be careful about?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. So in terms of, let's say, for example, just general exercise, we'll keep this quite generalized. General exercise is seen to be quite low risk. Obviously, if once we do exercise and things like that, it's one of those things where it's always kind of applicable to yourself. Obviously, experiencing some form of ache, some form of pain can be quite normal. Doesn't necessarily mean that there's anything broken or anything like that, or anything that's torn or ruptured or anything like that. And sometimes general aches and pains are kind of normal with exercise. When you think about when we perform an exercise, we're pushing ourselves to a point of exertion, we're pushing ourselves to a point of pain, which almost allows us to, the more we do, we can kind of improve that sort of pain tolerance. And that's something that I'd like to really want you to kind of really focus on. If you are wanting to start to exercise a bit more, you're almost improving that tolerance to exercise, to exposure, to when you're doing these different things, and your risk to ultimately injury in the long term is a lot lower. So yeah, in terms of that, it can be seen as very low risk, especially when you're doing, for example, things like I'm going to just take two exercises, maybe squats and deadlifts, which can be seen to be quite seen in the outside world quite risky, but has also been seen to be quite low risk as well. So hopefully that kind of summarizes it.
Yeah, I think like what we've said, something that I've read, I can't remember the exact percentages, but it was around a 65-35% split where actually 65% of injuries are spontaneous in nature. They happen for no particular reason, and only 35% of injuries actually happen due to an inciting event, whether it be lifting something or a car accident or falling down the stairs. So often these injuries happen without any clear reason and aren't linked towards a specific activity. And as we can see, these pictures here demonstrate what happens to our body as we age. We often lose a lot of muscle mass called sarcopenia. We lose a lot of muscle mass as we age naturally due to many hormonal changes, but also some that are activity related. You can see the muscle density of a 40-year-old triathlete on the picture on the left-hand side. And then the picture on the furthest right-hand side is a 70-year-old that's remained generally active. The picture in the middle is a 74-year-old that's ultimately stopped being as active as they previously were. And you can see how much they were able to maintain their muscle mass, which is going to overall help their overall well-being, help them to be able to do the things that they want to be able to do. Jake, is there anything you want to add onto this slide?
Yeah, I love a bit of a stat, Luke. So I think there's a really good one that sort of demonstrates this, especially with the image that we have on the screen showing about a 70-year-old triathlete, which some people might find quite extreme. We don't expect everyone who's joined today to start doing triathlons. I certainly won't be doing so myself. But a few of the sort of key statistics maybe to latch onto is as simple as 60 minutes of exercise a week. If you did dedicate that time towards some resistance training, can actually reduce overall mortality rates by around 15% and general illness and poor health by 27%. So when you think about those numbers in a trade-off for just 60 minutes of training a week, I think that really does speak volumes about how beneficial it can be.
Yeah, and this is a lot more complex than how we're making it now. There's more complex discussions that can be had around this. But to summarize it in a sentence, I would say that it's far more risky not to exercise than it is to exercise. Would you both agree with that?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I think that's what the research says. So yeah, I'd be fully on board with that approach.
100%.
Yeah, I think that coming back to what other people said earlier, a key thing that we've missed out from exercise when we were describing what it is at the start is that it doesn't have to be jumping on a treadmill. It doesn't have to be climbing Snowdon. It doesn't have to be clanging and banging weights in a gym. Gardening is a perfect example of activity, which can also be exercise. You're maintaining the physicality of your body. You're remaining active, and you're doing something that you enjoy, and that can be really useful. Our expert field, if you like, is treating people who have painful conditions. So we thought that we would talk a little bit about whether exercising with a painful condition is still safe and whether there's any extra things that we want to be aware of or anything that we want to add. Nathan, this is an area that you're particularly interested in, mate.
So yeah, obviously when we've got a painful condition, it's how we can kind of exercise through that if we've got pain and we've got and how that can be beneficial. The way I'm going to kind of describe it is if we've got kind of a long-term issue that can be quite painful, sometimes using exercise can be the main benefit. It will be generally quite painful throughout that, but doesn't necessarily mean that we're causing any sort of external damage. So for example, when we've got things like, for example, back pain, that can be is quite a common injury, and when we manage things like flare-ups can be quite interesting. And I always say the way we can kind of utilize exercise whilst we've got that painful condition is something is always better than nothing, or even trying to do a little bit more can always be as beneficial as possible. The idea to take from this is when we've got long-term pain, or there is pain, is that it doesn't, as I was saying previously, it doesn't necessarily mean that there's anything broken or there's anything kind of torn. like say, or yourself, you're not broken as well. So often the easier the exercises are, and the easier the stuff that you can do normally goes a long way. Simplicity is always the key factor. Looking at what you can do within your life to try and incorporate that exercise, if that's through things that you enjoy to do, is always a good place to start. And I always say to a lot of people, you are the best person to kind of help the pain and help the flare up by trying to incorporate exercise into your lifestyle 100%. So when we've got a painful condition, it doesn't necessarily mean that we can't do nothing. We can always do something.
Yeah, I think to summarize what you're saying there, Nathan, is if anybody on this meeting does have a long-term painful condition, osteoarthritis, back pain, sciatica, you'll know more than anybody that that condition isn't a flat line across the middle. It's not every day you wake up, the pain's not going to feel exactly the same. Some days will feel better, some days will feel worse. If it feels worse, it doesn't mean that you're back at square one, and it doesn't mean that you're broken, is essentially what we're trying to say.
Yeah.
There is space to exercise, but it has to be done safely, and you should ultimately get some medical support to help you with that. But I think that exercise can be a really important thing to implement into your routine. Scott, I apologize. I think sometimes we can get a little bit carried away with what we're talking about. So your comments like that are really, really important to helping us make this really understandable. Scott's asked if we're going to clarify what we mean by resistance training. Jake, can you clarify that?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for the question, Scott. So I think resistance training is often misinterpreted as being in the gym and lifting weights. Certainly that's the conclusion I tend to jump to when I think about resistance training. But actually it just refers to an external load. So it's any form of physical activity, which could be carrying shopping bags would be a great example. Gardening with a hand tool, again, that would be an external load. Or it could be things like resistance bands or weights in the gym. So there are plenty of examples of what resistance is, but essentially it's an external load fighting against gravity that you're moving from a manual perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. Push-ups, sit-ups to some extent, body weight squats, all the resistance training as well.
Hopefully that answers your question, Scott, but if not, please pop another message in the chat and we can certainly expand further. Thank you.
Jake, is there anything that you want to add on top of what Nathan mentioned?
In relation to pain itself, Luke?
Yeah.
So I think it's probably just important to touch on the fact that pain can be good and bad. So there are parts of your training which will definitely cause pain. We talk about delayed onset muscle soreness, for example, which is our body's natural sort of response to physical exercise in a lot of cases. And our body's constantly replenishing its muscle cells. So it's important to understand that actually pain can be good and bad. And if we can find the right balance in our training, then actually it's super important and can be really valuable to learn a new relationship with pain.
Definitely. Because I think ultimately with painful conditions, with life, we're never going to be able to fully avoid injuries. We're never going to fully be able to avoid aches and pains. It's part of us. And the better that we can learn to manage that, the better our overall health is going to be. Obviously, we want to minimize the amount of pain that we're in. Nobody wants to be in pain. But it can be part of our day-to-day life for everybody. Amy, I have seen your question about hypermobility. We will come on to that at the end as a little bit of a specialist question, if that's okay. So I'm just going to earmark that before we move on. So we're now going to touch on how we can build exercise into your life. There's really common ways that we can do that. There's a bit of a story that I like to use to explain how we can do this effectively. You might have heard of things like couch to 5K, or you might notice that what you start slowly with things, you go for a walk and it feels really challenging initially, your joints can hurt and you can be out of breath, but the more that you do it, if you do it every day, it gets easier and your body adapts and adjusts to it. Now, why does it do that? And this was ultimately determined by somebody called Hans Selye, who in the early 20th century actually coined the term stress. The stress wasn't known as a thing before Hans Selye. And this is a little bit of a brutal study, though I have to admit. We're not going to think of the poison I'm going to mention as a poison. Instead, we're going to think of this as a stressor in our life, as an exercise, or as anything. It could even be alcohol. So what Hans Selye did was he took a study group of rats and he gave them a certain dosage of poison. Initially, this poison killed all of the rats. So then he took another study group of rats and he exposed them to a much smaller dosage of the same poison until he found a dosage that had no effect whatsoever. Over a period of weeks and months, he then gradually built this dosage of the poison up until he gave them the dosage of the poison that was historically caused all the previous rats to die, and it had no effect to these study group of rats. And what he demonstrated was that your body's continuously adapting to things that we expose it to. More interestingly, that's why things like metals and substances that produce certain amount of radiation, the reason why that has that effect on our body is because our body's not adjusted and adapted to it, whereas nitrogen, carbon, whatever, our body's adjusted to that because it's been around it for millions of years. So it no longer has any effect on our overall systems, which can be really interesting. And that, just if we zoom out, that really dictates why our body can adapt to the stress, why things can be really useful. Starting at a smaller dosage to where it has no effect, and then gradually building it over time allows our body to adjust and adapt and go through those processes that it does naturally. Jake, I know you had some other things that you wanted to touch on with regard to building exercise into our lifestyle and how we can do that sensibly and safely.
Yeah, so I think sharing a bit of a personal approach on this one, Luke. So I've always had a keen interest in running. I can't say I'm very good at it, or certainly after speaking with you two fellas, I've learned that I wasn't as good at it as what I thought I might be. So 5K was always a target of mine that I was interested in trying to achieve. I wasn't able or motivated, let's say, to go out and run 5K on my own. So what I chose to do was actually sign up to a park run, which was local to me. And I found that quite a few hundred people were attending this event, and it was all different ability levels, speeds, and that sort of social element and the inclusiveness of being able to go somewhere and use external factors to motivate me to achieve my own goal was actually something I found really useful. And my times have improved by doing so. And it's actually something now I look forward to going to each week. And that's all on the back of essentially utilizing my social network and finding something that I've enjoyed in order to motivate me to go out and exercise, where something previously like that was definitely something I'd fear and maybe not something I'd be looking forward to week on week.
Great personal example, and thank you for being so open and honest with us, Jake. I think that's a really applicable example that will apply to a lot of people. Summarizing that, find something you enjoy and get people to help you along that journey. Nathan, I think you had something more to add on that.
Yeah, I always think like it always sounds very easy said than done, but I always like to come back to goals and also like and looking at other forms of activity that you haven't really tried before, and kind of just trial and error with a few things. Like you're never really going to know what you're interested in until you've tried it. I know from a personal standpoint, I've always been a footballer by nature, but I know through my career choice in this domain, I don't play as much as I used to due to injuries. But I don't feel like that's stopped me from finding other things that I might ultimately enjoy. So, for example, I tried badminton for a little bit, tennis for a little bit, more upper limb stuff, I would say, upper body stuff. But yeah, so just I find that trial and error, a few different things, and even communicating that with friends or family, what they may do in their spare time for exercise, can maybe just give you that little bit of inspiration, or maybe that foot in the door just to get back into some form of exercise. And even just general walks, it can go a long way with like friends and family and things like that. It can always go a good way as well, because you can almost chat and create that social aspect that we were speaking about before. And yeah, you can almost make it a weekly thing or a daily thing and add it to your routine.
I couldn't agree more, Nate. And I think that's a really important thing that you just mentioned there about things like walking that can be done really simply and can be built into our routine, especially when the days get a little bit longer.
Yeah.
I think what a lot of people do is they have a goal or a massive goal around this that we haven't yet touched on, really, is weight loss, isn't it? Around the new year, people have these weight loss goals that they try and meet or that they want to work towards. And what people ultimately end up doing is going to the gym for half an hour, 45 minutes, running themselves silly, waking up the next day being really sore, and then not being able to do anything for 3 or 4 days because they're so sore, and then doing it again and going around that cycle. What can be really interesting is that our body composition ultimately is determined by something called total daily energy expenditure. The science behind weight loss or weight gain is it's more complex than this, but essentially if you take in more calories than you burn, you're going to put on weight. If you burn more calories than you take in, you're going to lose weight. The main calories that we burn are either split into exercise activity or non-exercise activity. Simply because of the amount of time that we can be active in our day-to-day life versus that we can exercise, we burn well more calories in our non-exercise activity than in our exercise activity. I think that even if we're really active and we do a really hard session, we're never going to burn more than 5% of our daily calories through exercise. Most of it's just our body doing their internal processes. So if a key goal for you is you've not been active very much in the past, you want to lose some weight, starting off with things like walking, parking further away from the supermarket door, doing some steps when you're brushing your teeth, instead of taking one big basket of washing up the stairs, taking it 2 or 3 times and splitting it into smaller loads. All of that is going to have a much larger comparison effect on our ability to lose weight in the long term. Then doing really hard exercise, feeling sore, not being able to do much for 3 days after that. So that's something that's really important to be aware of as well, and can make things a lot more sustainable. And that sort of leads us on to how we can ultimately then keep exercise in our routine, not just have it there, but keep that in our routine and our lifestyle. As a further resource to help you with this, I read a book a while ago called Atomic Habits by James Clear, and it's an amazing book. It's got a lot of really useful information in there. And one of his key sayings from that book is, don't miss twice. We're not robots. We're going to have days that we can't do it. We're going to have things that pop up in life, and life will happen. But try not to miss twice. If you don't do one day, absolutely fine. Get back on the bandwagon the next day. Don't say, oh, it's Wednesday and I've not been to the gym yet, I'll start next Monday. No, start on Thursday and get your body moving, get back into your routine as soon as you can. And that will really help you in the long run, having that approach. And then another one, we've got the quote on the screen here. It says, make it obvious, make it attractive, make it easy, and make it satisfying. And there's some really strong pillars that will help to keep these lifestyle changes in your routine. If you say, oh, I know I need to go to the gym, but I hate it, do you think you're going to keep that in your routine? Maybe, but probably not. Pick something that you enjoy. You can't motivate yourself to exercise through fear. Knowing that you're going to reduce your chance of all-cause mortality by exercising doesn't motivate you to exercise. You can't motivate yourself through fear. Find something that's attractive to you as a person. Find something that you're passionate about, and that'll be much easier to keep in your routine. Often, people label themselves as lazy. People label themselves as not an exerciser or rubbish, or they can't do this, when actually you've just not set the plan up for you to succeed, and it was never going to work. Look at the decisions that you're making and pick something that you enjoy and that's important to you, even if that's really unique. and that's a much better way to keep it in your routine. Other things along a similar line really can be the way that you talk about it. Instead of, oh, I have to go out for a walk or I have to go out for a run, you get to go out for a run. Simply changing those terminologies, the way that you talk to yourself, the way that you talk about yourself, can have a huge impact on whether things stay or they don't. Nathan, you touched on goal setting before, and Jake, I know this is something that you use a lot with your patients.
Yeah, so often I use an acronym, which I think is quite commonly and widely sort of well known now, Luke, called SMART goals. And it's a tool that can often be used to break down a goal into certain sections that can make it more easy to achieve, essentially. So when we refer to the acronym as SMART, our S stands for specific, and that's making the goal more descriptive and more detailed, really. So, for example, I've talked a little bit around my previous goals of wanting to run 5K. My next target is to run 10K, and there's an event coming up in May this year, which I've selected, the Manchester 10K. So that's going to be my goal. It's a specific goal. It's I want to run 10K by May this year. How's that going to be measurable? Well, I've mentioned already the distance will be one factor, and I've put myself a time target on there as well, which is the T in the acronym, which leaves us then with the middle two, which is A and R. So is it achievable and is it realistic? Well, I didn't think I'd be able to run 5K at the start of this year. Within a month and a few part runs, that's now been something that's achievable for me. So yeah, I think it probably is a target for continue to work hard and train in the meantime. And I don't by any means expect that I'm going to go from running 5K to 10K overnight. So what I'm hoping to do essentially is build some short-term goals up to lead me towards that. So maybe by the end of next month, I'll look at trying to run 6K, 7K, 8K, and so on and so forth. And if there is a few speed bumps in that route and we don't maybe achieve a goal, that's not the end of the world. I'm not going to catastrophize the situation. We'll reassess, reset them goals, and then maybe go again. So that's a little acronym that I tend to use both personally and with my patients, that I think can be really effective to keep us on track and continuously improving, as opposed to seeing a distant goal that maybe doesn't feel like it's possible for you and trying to sort of get there overnight.
Absolutely, and I think that a really important time-bound thing in there is you've set a date for the event. You know, it's easy to say, isn't it? Oh, I'll run 10K, or I'll do it next week or the week after that. You've actually set a date that you're going to work towards, and I think that that's a really important thing to do. Set a date, set promises to yourself, and then around that, the progressive goals that you've touched on as well. Sometimes you work towards running a 10K, and that can be your goal, but other goals can be less specific, but you can say, I'm going to go out for a run 3 times a week. And that's a progressive goal in itself, because you know if you run 3 times a week, you're going to get fitter. And that's going to help you with the overall goal, even just putting your trainers on and getting out the door. Nikki's offered some support as well. She said Manchester 10K is a great race to aim for as well, if you're interested in the 10K. And she sends her best wishes.
Thanks, Nikki. Hopefully I'll see you there. I could do with the motivation.
Or their best wishes, actually. Yeah, and thanks for popping that in there as well, Jake. And then another thing that you're really big on, Jake, is optimizing your lifestyle so that you can support yourself getting through the exercise and kind of keep it in your routine. What are some of the things that you focus on?
Yeah, so we've talked a lot about the exertional side of things today in terms of the exercise and how we can maybe incorporate wanting to do the exercise, but there's much more to keeping a healthy lifestyle than that. So I think I split this into 2 areas, really. The first part is the fueling side of things, so making sure that the diet's appropriate. You touched about energy expenditure earlier, and when we refer to that, we have something called our basal metabolic rate, which is the amount of calories our body naturally requires or burns to survive. So making sure that if you are exercising rigorously, you're either achieving the amount of calories that you need each day or more so. So I think food tracking and knowing what you're putting in your body is very important. And then on the other side of that relationship, you've also got your recovery goals. So this could be things like stretching if you are feeling sore. Sleep and recovery, I think, is such an important part. And also taking out comparisons. I think a lot of us, we are accustomed to social media these days, and we see great examples of athletes who are excelling at what they do. And as a result, I think it's human nature that we often compare ourselves to them, and it can be demotivating at times. So actually surrounding yourself by people of a similar skill set or people of a positive nature towards your own aspirations is really important.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't have said it better myself. You touched on a bit that I know, Nathan, you're big on as well about social media and your mindset. Is there anything you want to add?
Yeah, I think it was kind of following on from what you said, really. I thought was really good in terms of changing your mindset from in terms of I have to do this, in terms of I want to do this, or in changing your mindset in a way of like in terms of your goals as well, linking into what yourself and Jake said of thinking like reaping the benefits in different ways, and not looking at the long-term goal first and looking at the short-term benefits. So thinking about those health benefits that we were speaking about before, thinking, right, I'm going to do exercise because of I want to lose weight, I want to gain muscle, I want to be more active. Think about those physiological things as well, because they're also really important in terms of your mortality, the all those kind of physical conditions that can be beneficial from exercise. And I think from a personal standpoint, when we do have injuries, and a lot of it can be easy said than done. And I think allowing yourself to do these things is good. And just tying in from what Jake said about obviously your goal setting and things like that. I think as long as you can create something that's achievable for yourself, it always goes a long way. And I think even from a personal standpoint, from my own training, I'd like to think that I've had a lot of quite traumatic injuries, but I've kind of allowed myself to practice what I preach in a way, in terms of not allowing that to be a barrier. But that doesn't mean let's go back to what I did when I wasn't injured. We've got to start from the baseline again, and making those little baby steps always goes a long way.
Yeah, thank you for that, mate. So, thank you very much for listening to us speak today. We are going to go back through the chat function. We're going to do a little bit of a Q&A in a moment, so get your questions ready if there's anything that you want to ask us. I think that I just wanted to have a little bit of a summary and some of the key points that we wanted to get across, and then some of the key things that you should be aware of. Your body is an amazing thing. The best thing about your body is that it adapts until we die. No matter what condition you're in now, it's plastic. We can adapt it. We can adjust it to do what you want to do with your life to some extent. That's the amazing thing about us. Start small, build to being the big goals that you want. Remind yourself, like Nathan just touched on, just because you can't do something now, it doesn't mean that you won't be able to do it in the future. Don't limit yourself. Start small. This is where we can start now, but we're building towards bigger. We're just doing it sensibly and safely, focusing on our ability to recover, focusing on our ability to manage that within our other responsibilities and our other things that we need to meet in our day-to-day life. Do something you enjoy, and remember, you don't have to do it alone. Lean on your social support networks. Get the support that you need. And we're also going to come on, we're going to talk a little bit about how us at PAM can support you as well. Guys, I know we might have overrun by a couple of minutes, but Jake or Nathan, is there anything else, any other key points that you wanted to add?
I'll let you go first, Jake, if you want.
Yeah, I think you defined it well there, Luke. I've got nothing to add, and seen some interesting questions dropping into the chat, which I'm sure we'll tackle in a moment.
Yeah, definitely.
Perfect. So Q&A, add the bits in that you want. We're gonna stay on. We're gonna answer all the questions that you've got. To find out more about our services, don't hesitate to get yourself over to our website or speak to your line managers. There might be some internal bits about PAM on your intranets and then things like that. The website is pamphysiosolutions.co.uk. And you can also use the links available here to find out more about our future webinars. You can sign up to mailing lists, and you can do all that through the website. I think we've got a lot of people on LinkedIn as well that share these aspects that you can really utilize. I'll leave this, and then if you do have any questions, our email is people-am.com. Sorry. Don't hesitate to get in contact with us, and we're more than happy to provide you any support with any injuries that you have. But it's multifaceted. We can provide support for your overall health needs. And I think that a really good example of that is Amy's question that was before. She mentioned about any exercises for hypermobility. That can be a really difficult one. It's obviously a very complex condition to have. I think that the initial part, as a standardized thing, obviously we don't know your personal situation. If I was to prescribe exercises for yourself, I focus more on the resistance-based exercises that we were talking earlier, some more strength-based things, working within a comfortable ranges of motion and not feeling like you have to use all of the available range of motion at the joint. Jake or Nathan, is there anything else that you would add to that?
Yeah, I'd be happy to touch on that as well, Luke. So I think with hypermobility syndrome, there are a few different types, but a lot of the research out there does support resistance training, as we've talked a little bit around earlier, but specifically focusing maybe on inner range. So not, as you said there, Luke, maximizing the full range of a specific joint. And also joint stability is huge. So maybe a slightly lower resistance as opposed to a maximal one, and really trying to control that movement through the available range rather than either going to your maximum exertion or through the full range at less control.
Nathan, anything else that you'd add on top of that, mate?
Yeah.
Great advice, by the way, Jake.
Yeah, just linking into a bit about both what you said in terms of resistance. You can utilize that in many different ways, using your own body weight. I think I may go with a different approach in terms of stability exercises to allow your joint to be in a comfortable position and not, as Jake and Luke were saying, not over put it in the joint into that hypermobile position, but almost keep the joint in a nice safe position, but challenging the muscles in that area. So for example, if it was hypermobility at an ankle, knee, wherever it may be, maybe doing like a single leg balance, for example, is always a good place to start, by challenging the muscles around the area, but not taking it through a range that might be unsafe.
Absolutely. Vicky, thank you so much for being so open and honest with us and giving us this scenario. So Vicky's 60. She mentioned that she's got some visceral fat in her tummy section. She's unsure whether it's hormone related. She's generally slim otherwise. She walks the dog 3 times a day and she swims twice a week. And she wants to know if there's any exercises that she can do to tackle this. There is obviously in the research bits about visceral fat that can be genetic related, that can make some people more predisposed to having that. It's hard to say generalized what the exact reason for that is, but it certainly can be hormone and genetic related. And then in terms of your overall lifestyle, it sounds like you're active, which is great. It sounds like you've got social responsibilities there with the dogs, or the dog, sorry. And I'd say that there's no better or worse exercise, to be honest. I think the best exercise is the one that you do. So focusing on the ones that you can do in your routine and build in is the best. And it sounds like you're doing that.
I'd be happy to add on to that as well, Luke. I think there's a lot of research out there that does state that you can't target specific weight loss from certain areas. So, for example, in this scenario we're talking about here, if you wanted to lose stomach fat, sadly you can't do abdominal crunches or leg raises in order to impact that specific area. What it can do is grow muscle, which can then cause toning to happen in that area, but it won't be a substitute for fat that maybe sits in specific areas of the body. It's a really common question we get asked in terms of people's own body compositions and why they maybe store at certain areas as opposed to others. But I think overall, if there was something you were looking to do in order to target one area or another, then actually probably looking at the nutritional and diet side of things is best. Putting yourself into a calorie deficit, and then overall that calorie deficit will then start to cause a global loss of any visceral fat, but that wouldn't come from one area more so than the other.
Yeah, absolutely. Nathan, anything you want to add, mate?
No, I was literally going to touch on about the calorie deficit. I think what you touched on there, Jake, was spot on, and you hit most areas. So I thought, I think the calorie deficit may be the more appropriate approach to that, but then also maintaining your current, as Luke said, maintain your current exercise. What you know and what's best will always benefit. So yeah,
absolutely. Penny, I wasn't expecting to get a comment like this, to be honest. This is a bit amazing, really. She asks, what's the best way to prepare for a very intense and difficult event, because she's doing a 24-hour workout for charity. She does highlight that she knows it's a bit crazy and that it needs stamina, strength, and the mental capacity to keep going. I think that you're never going to be able to condition yourself to manage that. That is going to be a mental capacity thing. Doing generally challenging things can build up your resilience to that. If you don't like cold water, making yourself do cold water can build a certain mental tolerance, mental resilience. But I think that you're going to be very well conditioned towards that. And I think that I know that you're doing that for an amazing cause. So hopefully that'll give you the motivation to get through it as well. And obviously the biggest thing that I would advise with that is the social aspect of that. Make sure that you've got people coming and seeing you. Make sure that you've got appropriate things to break up the day and things to look forward to doing that, because it will be a bit of a slog. Jake, Nathan, anything to add?
I think my point here would be about fueling. So 72 hours before the event, appropriate fueling needs to take place. So if you're doing 24 hours of exercise, then your body's going to require additional fueling through your nutrition. So whether it's carbohydrate loading prior to the event, I think would be very important. And then also fueling during the event. So taking on the correct amount of fuel from your food intake or drink intake during the event as well.
Brilliant. Nathan, anything else?
Yeah, I'm gonna have to agree with Jake again. I think it all comes down to your food, and what you're putting in your body is going to fuel yourself for the event and for your training ultimately. So I think that's going to be the main part of it. So from backing off what Jake said, I think it was absolutely spot on. Yeah, I think that's the main aspect.
Just with individual cases like that, Penny, I would seek advice if you haven't done so already. So to get the correct formula for you personally, it will differ to the next person. So actually speaking with maybe a nutritionist, a personal trainer, and getting some actual guidance around someone that's maybe had similar experience to the style of event that you're going for would be really important, rather than trying to maybe go at things independently.
Yeah, absolutely. Getting the support network around you. I've just recently read Kevin Sinfield's book about all the ultra marathons that he did, and he touches on how important that social aspect is, as well as fueling your body. So definitely. Any questions that we've missed?
Have we got one from Pauline around?
Yeah, that's it. Sorry, mate, go on.
It says there about type 2 diabetes and the use of insulin. I'm not sure how much exercise to do to keep a healthier weight as the insulin tends to add weight on.
Yeah, it sounds like a really difficult situation. I empathise with that. Hopefully you've got some support through the NHS.
Yeah, I think on this one it would be directing you towards your GP, Pauline. It falls slightly outside of our scope in terms of wider health conditions impacting maybe your exercise and the relationship there. So definitely a conversation to maybe have with your GP.
But again, the advice regarding exercise stays the same. There's no better or worse exercise. Something you enjoy, something you can do and you can manage comfortably is the best thing. Something that can be consistent in your routine.
I think we might have missed a question from Laura, I think, in between there.
Yes, you're right. So Laura asks, if you're experiencing pain, how do I know if it's safe to exercise? Nathan, do you want to answer that one, mate?
Yeah, definitely. So really good question. Because like I say, not every sort of condition is a chronic case or a persistent pain case. Like I say, the way I kind of structure it and the way I kind of experience it, I explain this to a lot of employees and patients and things like that, is if the injury, if you're kind of doing the exercise, for example, and there's a bit of discomfort throughout that exercise, a bit of pain throughout that exercise, and it's quite manageable. It's quite a mild to moderate pain. And when you stop doing the exercise, the pain tends to go away. That normally indicates that it's quite safe to do so. On the flip side, I would kind of say if the pain's kind of persistent and kind of intensifying, the more and more that you do the exercise, and when you stop doing the exercise, the pain is still quite intense and quite high and quite irritable. I would say you're probably doing more harm than good. So say, for example, if it was like a tendon related injury and that's kind of come on through access load and load and load, we need to kind of deload it and kind of work in a kind of moderate playing field. So I would kind of go off that baseline. If it's intensifying with the exercise, and if it's intensifying with the exercise, kind of reduce. If it's quite mild to moderate and it's quite maintainable, keep on going with it.
Yeah, absolutely. Couldn't agree more, mate. And that 24, 48 hour pattern after you've exercised, if it's the day after as well, or 48 hours after, consider that as well.
Yeah.
Jake, anything to add?
No, nothing at all. I think just an opportunity maybe to thank everyone for tuning in this afternoon. And it looks like the comments box is quieting down a little bit now. So unless we've got any other questions, we can maybe look at wrapping the session up there.
Yeah. Thank you, everyone.